psychology, especially Jungian and Freudian psychoanalysis, you've likely come across the concept of complexes. These inner structures, such as the father-mother complexes or the Oedipus complex, following, of course, each frame of thinking and theory, influence our relationships, behaviors, and interactions with others and society. In fact, each complex is tied to archetypal forces that often shape our lives, for the good and for the bad, without us realizing it, because it all happens unconsciously. In this episode, we will examine the father complex through Abraham's history with his father Terah, uncovering parallels to the individuation process, revealing what this biblical story signifies about our inner selves. As we're gonna see, the father complex ordains our affects and relationship with power, authority, and societal existence, and is closely connected to a rational and logical side, known as the Logos. So let's dive into this story to see what the hidden tradition speaks about Abraham as an inner quality of oneself. So let me read the Midrashim. Abraham's father, Terah, was an idol manufacturer who once went away and left Avraham in charge of the store. A man walked in and wished to buy an idol. So Avraham asked him how old he was, and the man responded, 50 years old. Avraham then said, "You are 50 years old and would worship a day-old statue?" At this point, the man left ashamed. Later, in the same day, a woman walked into the store and wanted to make an offering to the idols. So Avraham took a stick, smashed the idols, and placed the stick in the hand of the largest idol. When Terah returned, he asked Avraham what happened to all the idols. Avraham told him that a woman came in to make an offering to the idols. The idols argued about which one should eat the offering first. Then the largest idol took the stick and smashed all the other idols. Terah responded by saying that they are only statues and have no knowledge. Whereupon Abraham responded by saying that, "You deny their knowledge, yet you worship them." At this point, Terah took Avraham to Nimrod. Nimrod proclaims to Avraham that we should worship fire. Avraham responds that water puts out fire. So Nimrod, the great king, declares they worship water. Avraham responds that clouds hold water. So Nimrod declares they worship clouds. Once again, Avraham responds that wind pushes clouds. So Nimrod declares they worship wind. And finally, Avraham responds that people withstand wind. So Nimrod became angry with Avraham and declares that Avraham shall be cast into the fire. And if Avraham is correct, that there is a real God, then that God will save him. So Avraham is cast into the fire and is saved by God. Avraham's brother Haran sees what happened and says that he believes in the God of Abraham. Haran is thrown into the fire and it is not saved by God. Hence, the verse in Genesis 11 verse 28, "And Haran died in the presence of his father Terah, in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees." And just after this episode, God speaks to Abram, saying, "Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, into the land that I will show thee, and I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and be thou a blessing." This is present in Genesis 12, that in Hebrew is the portion Lech Lecha. It is necessary to point out that when this episode happened, Avraham was 75 years old. The sages speaks that Abraham was already a wise man, that achieved all the knowledge of that time. We can read in writings from Philon from Alexandria, the Greek philosopher, that Abraham knew all about the philosophy of the Chaldeans, knew all about astrology, math, Kabbalah, and so on. In fact, the first Kabbalistic book ever written is the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, that is attributed to Avraham and speaks about the relations between letters, astrology, and so forth. And traditionally, this history is mentioned in the Pshat level, the meaning of the literal one, as the moment when Abraham turned from idolatry to the monotheism. Following the hint of this simple Pshat level, of this simple meaning, we can state that Abram left the many god and goddess to Davak, to cleave into oneness. And from this path of many gods to the path of the one, the first theme that occurred to me is the problem of complexes. As Carl Jung states, the psyche is far from being a unity. On the contrary, it is a boiling cauldron of contradictory impulses, inhibitions, and affects. And for many people, the conflict between them is unbearable. The unity of consciousness, or the so-called personality, is not a reality at all, but a desideratum. In other words, we could say that we all know that our conscious intentions are constantly disturbed to a greater or lesser degree by unconscious intrusions, the cause of which are initially unknown to us. This happens every time that a complex is constellated. To exemplify how this constellation works, we can see frequently people possessed by complexes and act with anger or with all sorts of compulsions. And just after the compulsions passes, usually one thinks towards that attitude as it wasn't me, I was out of my mind, and etc. We usually are not so coherent with our ideas, with our emotions and actions. As an example in the Bible, we can remember the letter from Paul to the Romans, where he speaks, I not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, whether you believe in a demon of the air or infected in the unconscious that plays diabolical tricks, is all one in the symbolic path. In our story, the place that Avraham first lived is called Ur Kasidim, the land of idolatry. And following the hidden tradition, the name Ur Kasidim in Hebrew can be read in a superliteral way as light, or that is like demons, Kasidim. And it is exactly the image of what Carl Jung is speaking about constellation of complexes. Because the unity of consciousness, the intention of the will and the memory are affected and can lead us to thoughts and obsessive states. The complex can be portrayed as an emotionally accentuated psychic situation, is where we are dominated by an alien affection. Where the terrain of the complexes begin, the freedom of the ones ends. Just to point, before we return to our story, the concept of complexes is usually associated with psychopathology, but there are also positive aspects of the complexes. Even the ego could be classified as a functional complex. In fact, autonomy complexes are normal life phenomena. So, to our today's conversation about the father complex, Neumann advocates the importance of one to becoming aware and overcome the both parental complexes. He speaks that the hero, that is the one who is striving for individuation process, has both first parents against himself and must overcome both, the male and female parts of what he calls the Ouroboros. that is the primordial state of unconsciousness. Marion Woodman also refers in her book, Leaving My Father's House, that one must reclaim his projections that are first directed to mother and father or into structures like institutions, and feel like an orphan in this world to gain access to the abundance of the inner reality. In our plot, especially about the structure of the father, it is represented by Terah and Nimrod, the father of Avraham and the king of the Chaldeans, because the world of the father is the world of the collective values, that is, the canon of values that gives a culture its peculiar stability. Verena Kast points that the one who carries a negative father complex would carry an inner figure that speaks constantly that you cannot abandon my opinions, my values, my ideas, otherwise I cannot be proud of you, cannot love you. We all know that person that thinks that the only value that she or he has is related with doing the right thing, following the rules, institutional rules, or the rules of her house, doing the perfect, the best. Well, the terrible paternal complex is related to not allowing personal development because it fixes consciousness in a wrong and collective way, maintaining the old system and making lose contact with creativity. This is the castration or the captivity that happens in the negative father complex. So, the role of the individuation process is represented by the plot of the hero that break with this paternal complex. In the sense, the conflict arises with the inner voice, that is the order of the transpersonal archetypal father who wants the world to be transformed. And this cause collides with an orientation and fixity of the personal father, who speaks in the name of the old law. We can see this pattern in Avraham, Moses, and Jesus' history, and in all fairy tales where this relationship is portrayed by the hero who has an unusual birth, whose father is usually a king who is warned of this birth and the risk of his scepter being taken, replacing the old with the new order. In general, the child hero is expelled from the ruling house, his enemy, by the father king and return later victorious. Many people don't know, but Avraham also had a midrashim that speaks that Nimrod was hunting all the baby child that was born in that time, wanted to kill him. The same structure we see in Moses and in Jesus' story. So I wonder how can we see inside of us this call of this child that is long forgotten in ourselves, trying to break the old law. And one different aspect from the Greek tradition, different from what happened with Oedipus, in Abraham's story, he did not kill his father Terah. In fact, he left the land of Chaldeans with Terah, with his wife Sarai, and with his nephew Lot, a quaternity that means completion. So Terah follows Avraham for some time. So this image can represent that we cannot kill the complex, but we need to learn how to live with it, to listen to it, but not to be possessed by it. We need to put some break, We need to know that if I do that thing, I will be acting like automatus. I will be victim of this complex. Heading to the final of our conversation, let's look a little bit about the meaning of the calling Lech Lecha, that was the calling by God to Avraham. The first thing is that the book of Zohar discusses why the saying is Lech Lecha, because in a literal translation, the second word, Lecha, wasn't needed to say to someone, leave a place. Also, the suffix ha, like lecha, on the second word, gives the meaning to go for yourself, is to say, lech lecha, this expression do not mean to get out from a place, but mostly to go to your inner self. And this is the lonely road. We can see in the story that Haram, Abraham's brother, tried to follow Avraham, but he got that because it wasn't his call. You cannot copy a path from other. You need to follow your own path. Additionally, the quest for unity is also portrayed in this calling because Lech Lecha gives the sum of 100 that represents unity in multiplicity, of course, but also represents the exact age when Avraham had the birth of Isaac. Another secret that the Hebrew language gives us here is that the word land, to leave the land and to go to the promised land, the name in Hebrew is Eretz. And Eretz can represent a land, but also with the same letters we form the word Ratzon, that means a will. So the sages speaks that in this calling, he is not leaving the land of the Father, but the will of the Father, and going to the will of the promised land of Israel, that is the tree of life. This is why a good friend of mine said these days in a beautiful insight that this is why Jesus spoke about the Father, or the expression my Father, that could be written in Hebrew as Avi, because my Father gives the number 13, that is love, ahava, and unity, echad. And finally, my friends, the book of Zohar brings one deep secret hidden in this story. The sages speaks that the call came just after the will of Abraham was manifested to leave Chaldea. It was after the breaking of the idols. Only after Abraham manifested his will, the call of God came. So the Zohar speaks, now I am quoting, "Whoever arouses himself to purity is assisted. For as soon as he set out to go to the land of Canaan, immediately Hashem said to Avraham, 'Go your forth, come and see.' An entity above is not aroused until there is a first aroused below, that upon which it may abide." This calling in the book of Zohar is constant. We can see in many passages the importance of one making an act of freedom to receive the divine assistance. So, following this insight, the call for individuation needs somehow the manifestation of one's own will. It comes from nothingness, but it needs a will. If you ever had heard this call, this inner call, is because you had already opened your ears to the call. Edgar speaks that this call to leave your country, your family, and your father's house is a reminiscent of the saying of Jesus. "It is not peace I have come to bring, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be those of his own household." Psychologically, this refers to the separation that is needed to break up a state of participation mystic, and it is a basic requirement of individuation. One must be dumped out of the psychic containers that keep one unconsciously identified with family, tribe, party, church, and country. These are Edgar words. And he advocates that the one who succeeds in dissolving this participation mystic becomes, like Abraham, a great nation and makes the birth of a new world. So, to circulate around this Abraham as a quality that breaks with the old parents and cleave to the archetypal figures of father and mother, we can portray it with another secret that is present in Genesis chapter 2 verse 4 that speak, "These are the generations of the heaven and of the earth, when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven." In this passage, the word Behibaram, that means they were created, if you look in a Hebrew Bible, you can identify that this word contains a little letter, smaller than all the others. That is the letter He, the fifth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And with this word, we can form the word Be-Abraham, which means that heaven and earth were created for the sake of Abraham. We can think about heaven as the male quality, the archetype of the father, and the earth as the female quality, as the archetypal mother. So from this, we can decode Avraham as a quality of the mature human being, the one who do not want to receive from father and mother complex, but wishes to cleave to an abundance of creativity that comes from the self and comprehends the masculine and feminine marriage between heaven and earth. And Jung hints at this mysterious idea when he speaks that it is quite possible that we contain whole peoples in our souls, worlds where we can be as infinitely great as we are infinitely small externally. So great that the history of the redemption of a whole nation or a whole universe might take place within us. So, dear friends, thank you for listening and joining with us till now. I hope that this conversation makes sense to you. And if you had already heard this call, this inner call of creativity, that means the divine abundance, the divine Shefa coming to you. I hope that you can join it. I hope that you can find grace in the eyes of the self, in the eyes of the Lord, and follow a blessed path. I wish you all the best, and I see you soon.